So hello everyone, welcome back. It's time for another movie review here with my new roommate Ben, um, and we just went and saw Apollo 18. So this is another found footage type movie, and they had this marketing scheme trying to make you believe that it's real, but everyone knew it was fake. Like if you don't know it's fake, you're pretty slow. Um, yeah, we just got out of the movie like less than a half hour ago. So, what were your initial reactions coming out of the movie?
Well, I was surprised by how much I liked it. I have long maintained that format is pretty tired, and there's not a lot of like new things happening with it. I can't think of one. I remember really liking Cloverfield, but everything else has kind of left me cold. So in that vein, anyway.
Yeah, I mean, there was Cloverfield was like there. The dialogue I thought in Cloverfield was pretty bad because it was mostly run, run, oh fuck, what is that? You know, it's kind of like Blair Witch had the same thing. But yeah, there were good things about Cloverfield, but yeah, as for this movie, like I thought the writing was pretty good.
Yeah.
There wasn't any like glaring problems where like I was like, oh, why would they say something like that or anything like that, and it didn't seem tired at any points like Paranormal Activity or anything like that. But
Yeah, I guess I was really wary of it going in, and like I wanted to see it, what was in the theater and everything, but I just kind of expected that it was going to be kind of dumb and kind of lame, and it really surprised me with the things that it did that were interesting. It captured a really a genuinely like scary sense of claustrophobia that you didn't get from a lot of other ones. Just the setup being really isolated. The same thing that worked really well in like movies like Aliens and um, The Thing, where there's just like this really remote, isolated location for the premise for the story to take place is always a really great way to like start things off, scary. And
yeah,
there you can't get much further away and much more isolated than in space, and they did some really interesting things with that, and just the way that they positioned the cameras. They did some really interesting things with angles and with the editing and like the ways that they tried to manipulate the film to make it look aged and
yeah.
to make it look period and appropriate. Were really interesting and really kind of fun to watch, and at the same time also I think kind of a drawback and kind of a conflicting in terms of maybe the continuity or what might be most realistic.
Yeah, yeah. There were points where it kind of takes you out of the movie a little bit, and you're you kind of have to take a leap of faith to believe that some of these things are happening, or even just some of the equipment. Like we had a discussion just on the drive back about the equipment and like would they even take so many cameras up to the moon, or even like I had a question on how they got the footage back and that type of thing. We're trying not to spoil this movie. I know our other reviews like we kind of spoil things, but we're gonna try and not do that for this one because this is a horror movie, and that's part of the fun is like discovering the ending and what happens with it. Um, but yeah, there were parts where I was like, why would they have so many cameras? Um, just when they take it out with you. I mean, they try to make it um, believable because they're saying they're going up there for some kind of mission to observe like ICBMs that the Russians are sending off or something like that. I don't know. They didn't go into too much depth on that.
Yeah, and it's not something I know enough about. I don't know enough about the Apollo missions to say like, well, here's what they would have had, and here's what is realistic, and here's what not realistic. For a movie that takes place on the moon, they cover a lot of ground. I mean, there's a lot of like back and forth between locations and stuff like that. I'm not really sure how that works. And there's the Russian,
Yeah.
you know, uh, vessel there, and I'm not really sure how realistic all that is, but that's what they're playing with. They're playing with, you know, our very limited knowledge of what, you know, we only know what we're told.
Yeah.
And so it's, you know, that's where I could kind of suspend my disbelief and just kind of go with what they were telling me. And so that was kind of fun. And they did some really interesting things with what the things that we do know of actual, like, recorded history, at least, you know, like I said, as far as we've been told.
Yeah.
So.
But that was one of the things that I thought was kind of interesting, and this doesn't spoil the movie at all, but talking about the Russians being on the moon, which, you know, according to history, like in 1969, the Russians scrubbed their lunar program after we had already arrived on the moon, which to me is I've always had questions about that, because if it's still the Cold War, like I would have thought the Russians would have tried to prove that they could do it as well, and for some reason they just scrubbed it all, maybe budgetary reasons. I mean, we don't know enough about history to say for certain. But I thought that was pretty interesting, though, them discovering this Russian lander on the moon, and then and then they're questioning it as well, because like the astronauts were never told that the Russians went up there or anything like that. And then if you find out that the DoD like suspected that the Russians went up there, so I thought that was pretty interesting about it.
Yeah, I did too. I thought that was really. I mean, what a shock it must have been. You know, if you try to get in the minds of those characters, like what a shock it would be to see these footprints there when they're supposed to have only been, you know, American footprints there, or like, and it's been a long time since the last mission and all of that. So you would assume that a lot of stuff has kind of, you know, disappeared or, you know, whatever. So it must have been. So that was a really interesting thing when they saw human footprints up there. It was like, oh my gosh, where is this going? You know, and so it did take me some places I was not expecting. And I guess as far as the story goes, there were a lot of things that were really interesting, and because it's a science fiction movie and it's kind of like it's this format, there were a lot of things that I think were kind of cliche as well and kind of contrived in order to get the story, like move the story along.
Such as?
Like for instance, without ruining anything, that the very fact of the capsule or the Russian vessel being fully operational.
Yeah, that seemed a little too convenient, especially when they get in there and they see all the equipment is torn apart, and then they find blood in there too. Like, it seemed a little implausible that this thing would be able to lift off at all.
Right. So those things, and I thought, you know, I won't say anything about the ending except that I did like the way it ended. I did think that was an interesting way for it to go. And that, I mean, that will just be foreshadowing with the vessel there, I guess, what we said about the vessel. But
yeah.
So that was a little much, and there were some things that were a little much, and there's some things that I'd seen before a lot, like the infection and the, you know, the nature of the creatures and stuff, you know. But they did some interesting things with the creatures that I'd never seen before too, and you know.
Yeah, it's a little unexpected. There's little hints, like in the beginning, like where they have like the surveillance equipment, the motion capture surveillance equipment up there, and it zooms in a little bit, or they highlight even a little bit. I thought that was kind of cool, and then you see like a rock move, like just a tiny little bit, and it's enough to intrigue you to keep watching and to not be bored by it, which is one of the things I said when we came out, is like that's a lot of my problem with these found footage type movies, especially Paranormal Activity and especially Blair Witch. The first half hour of the movie just bored me intensely.
Yeah.
And this one did not do that.
Yeah, right. Yeah, that would be the main difference. And the same is true of Cloverfield too. There's so much exposition, and they go to such great lengths to convince you that what's happening is plausible and realistic or real.
Yeah.
And this movie kind of, I think, you know, it operates on the assumption that it's true, although clearly we all know it's fiction. but they manage to kind of breeze past that, and you get into the really, and I think part of that's because it's kind of fun to watch. Just like they do a good job with the production design in terms of putting it in a period, placing it in a period of time.
Mm-hmm.
And they do a good job with the characters, and you know enough about them to make them interesting. Not that you really care about them so much, but that you kind of understand them. So I thought that was all pretty well done, and much better than what I thought I was going to see, what I thought I was in for, and because I've just been perpetually disappointed with those you know paranormal activities like.
Yeah, the found footage genre.
Found footage genre, yeah.
Yeah, and but that then there's a point in the movie where it kind of unravels a little bit, and that was because of the acting, I thought, and we both thought this. Like, there's a point like after the infection where the acting kind of becomes unbelievable.
Yeah.
And we were talking about this that it's really difficult to be able to act like you're not acting. And that's what you have to do in these type of movies. And the only one that even seemed kind of believable for me was the Blair Witch, and that's because those people weren't really actors. Yeah. Like they called themselves actors, but they were not actors.
Yeah, I don't really know. I don't really remember that, but I remember that there were situations in the Blair Witch where they were designed to actually scare the actors. So the actors were actually responding to some very real stimulus, you know. So the believable moments in Blair Witch, and that movie did scare the crap out of me when I saw it the first time. And I don't even remember how old I was, maybe 18 or something. So that movie did have the merit, and that's, you know, if you don't like the genre, you have the Blair Witch to blame, because it's, you know, that's responsible. It's all Blair Witch's fault. But in this one, it was a little different. It was a little more like, well, we're really trying to create something that is supposed to be a historic document, like a historical document, which is like rooted in a place and a time and a historical, you know, environment. And
that we're all familiar with.
That we all know. Yeah, exactly. And that being the main difference, I think, one of the main big differences between this movie and all the other previous movies. So when you have an actor that can't quite do that, you know, I just imagine the director talking to the actor about his role and like what he's going to be doing next, and how the actor must have been like, how am I going to do this, because I'm supposed to be scary, I'm supposed to be scared, but I'm supposed to appear as though I'm not acting at all.
Yeah. So
it must be really difficult to do, but it's also the big downfall of the movie for me when I can see that these actors are trying to be scared.
Yeah, because I thought up until that point where the horror elements start to happen, I thought the acting was really good at that, you know, up until that point. I put the acting up there almost like with the original Apollo movie, you know, and oh yeah, that's the other Ron Howard movie I couldn't think of. That was really good. But that's a side note. Sorry, people. That, I mean, up until the part where the horror elements start to happen, like, I thought the acting was really good. But after that, when they're supposed to be scared or they're supposed to be scary or whatever, like, that's when the acting just started to become totally unbelievable.
Yeah, and they did some things with the editing that I disagreed with. I thought were bad decisions. Like, some of the editing, like particularly the shots where there's a strobe, that was really effective, because you see something and then it's a little closer, and then you see it again and it's a little closer. Yeah, and that kind of stuff worked, I thought, really well. And I was scared, and there were a couple times when I did jump, you know.
And it's pretty effective with that.
It's pretty effective overall, but and it's great when you go to a movie and you see and people jump. You know, I live for that, because it so seldom works in horror movies, you know. And that's why they're great to see in the theater. But there were times when I also was like, I was scared, but I also, after the fact, was like, whoa, really? They really jumped the shark there, because there's a couple shots of the character that we were just talking about where there's a close-up on him, and there's all this, like, crazy editing, like, you know, time-lapse, like, and it just, like, gets nuts, and you're just like, whoa, that is so out of character for the rest of the style of the movie.
Yeah,
Because
and
if it's
seemed
supposed to be a
little hokey
document,
even.
yeah, because is the person who's cutting this after the fact, are they doing that to scare you? No.
Yeah.
In the reality of this movie that they're presenting to you, it's supposed to be the footage is supposed to be as found.
Yeah.
So I didn't that took me right out of the movie.
They
Even
did-
though it was scary, you know.
Yeah, it was. They did that again too, like near the end, where the one guy like gets to the other lander, and like he's really fatigued and breathing really hard. But then they show shots of him just sitting there.
Yeah.
And the audio is totally disjointed with that, and I did not like that at all. It totally took me out of the film, and it totally made it not believable as a documentary type thing.
Yeah, that was the thing where they had sound, the source of the sound and picture were off from each other. That was a bad editorial decision. Like, that should never have happened, because that implies then and ruins the premise that this is found footage. The only way that would happen is if the editor did it.
Yeah.
So that was a big downfall of the movie for me in terms of keeping it consistent.
Yeah.
And I think even in a movie like this, even if it could have been a little more boring if those consistencies were there and the scares were worth it. It could have been a little more plain than it was. It was really, really souped up. Like, it was really, really, the production was really, really pushed in a certain direction, and I think that they pushed it too far to scare you, or and those are the cliches I'm talking about mostly. So those are my biggest problems with it. Like, if you set out to make a movie like this, find out what you're trying to do first, and then stick with it.
Yeah, keep it consistent.
Yeah.
And this movie was not consistent, especially in like the last half hour. Like, it started to not be so consistent, and it unraveled the believability quite a bit.
Right.
So that was one of the biggest drawbacks, I think, of this film. Yeah, it could have been a little more boring even though, and I would have liked it because I was more intrigued like near the beginning of the film, like where there were some things that would just happen, and it was just like this little thing, and like it made you look around a lot of the time, like it made you look for things, and like there was a part when they were inside the American lander, and there was something that moved like way off to the side, and you're like, wait, did something just move or did it not? And you're totally questioning that the whole time. I liked the way that they did that, and they just totally threw that out the window for the rest of the film.
Yeah, and I think when they did those subtle little things towards the beginning with the rocks moving and stuff, like, once you find out what's really happening in those shots later on, you think back to those early shots, you're like, whoa, that was clever,
Yeah.
because you think the rocks are moving when something else is going on,
Yeah.
or you think something's moving the rocks,
Yep.
when something else is really happening. So they could have played with that a little bit more, but I thought that was a really clever kind of back and forth that they did. And then the one shot that really kind of took me by surprise was the shot where he discovers there's something in his suit with him.
Yeah, and that's in the trailer, so we're not.
Yeah, that's in the trailer. I remember seeing that, but in context, it's a lot more effective.
Yeah. Yeah, and that was pretty cool though too, because it was really quick. It was really quick, and then the guy's just gone, and then the other astronaut has to go out and look for him. And so that was effective, but that was the last time it was effective.
Right. Yeah.
Like after that, then it started to go too far, and even they started using those strobe effects again, and then it didn't work because they were maybe a little too long even, and they were long on purpose because they wanted you to be able to see the aliens and all of that type of thing. But
yeah, I think if you employ an effect like that multiple times, you're giving away the fact that you're using it for effect. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
like, you're
exactly.
giving away the fact that it's supposed to be a scary device rather than like a realistic thing that could happen.
yeah,
So,
yeah,
So that the fact that wouldn't happen twice on two separate occasions for no
No.
reason during a scary moment,
Yeah.
So yeah, so those were the things. But this is all kind of occurring to me after the fact. During the movie, I wasn't really thinking that. I was really just kind of enjoying it, and I think overall it was more than I expected. And I think I'll probably say that in just about every review because I always try to hype myself down for a movie before I go to see it. Like I always try to say it's probably because that way I'm not disappointed. You know what I mean? And
Well, Hollywood has set a pretty low bar.
standard. Yeah, that's
low
true.
Standard.
But something like this, I had really low standards for. Like I was just like, you said that the reviews weren't great, so I was like, okay, well, then I had to expect even less. And it's it's that kind of movie, so I really expect nothing. And so I was pleasantly surprised, and I left the theater feeling like, okay, I did that. That was good.
And then maybe the final thing, we'll try and talk a little bit about the aliens without spoiling it too much. But I thought that was not very unique. Like the only way that was unique was the way that the aliens were kind of discovered.
Right.
Or the way that they're camouflaged, we could say. But the aliens themselves were not unique. It was not anything that I was like, oh, that was cool. Like, and then there was a point where like you're thinking, oh, this is just like this other movie, and then it kind of has expectations that like you're like, oh yeah, it's gonna be this, and it kind of becomes that too.
Yeah, and I agree. I mean, I think there's one. I'm trying not to say anything too descriptive here, but there's one creative thing that they did with this creature that took me by surprise. It was like way out of left field,
Yeah.
And I really liked that about it. It was really like wacky and different, but also somehow strangely believable. In the way they develop the effects of the creature and the way that they show you the creature, it works.
It does.
And it's something that's really hard to make work, I think.
Yeah, and I think that was effective. It was just that after you get beyond that, it was nothing very well thought out, I think.
Yeah.
It was like, oh yeah, we can make them be this.
Right.
And then they don't do anything else with it.
Right.
And that was one of the problems with the film. But
and I was waiting for a moment where there was going to be this really big reveal because the movie is shot almost entirely in a really close up because they're using these old cameras and they don't have a great depth of field with their lenses that they have and stuff. So it's all really close. It's all maybe from here to the camera, maybe. There's about as far as away as you get.
Yeah.
And so I was always waiting for something some big reveal where you'd see like this big like emergence of monsters or something, and that never really happens. Which reminds me of the other movie I was trying to pick my brain that's in this format, which is Troll Hunter, which I don't know if you've seen.
I haven't seen that one yet.
Which I thought was really another one that was really actually good and interesting in the same way, and they use, I mean it's updated, so it's their technology is more up to date than the one that we're talking about now, but they have a lot of those big reveal moments where you go almost a third of the movie without seeing anything, just like little hints of stuff, and then there's a moment where you're like, oh, okay, there's what we're dealing with.
Yeah.
They string you along in this movie very well, but there isn't like a huge payoff for it. There's not like a big crescendo of action or anything. It's kind of just, and that is keeping in the style of the found footage narrative.
Yeah.
But it's also kind of like, well, I paid to see a science fiction movie, a horror movie in space.
Yeah.
Wow me a little bit,
Yeah.
And if you're not gonna wow me with the technical aspects of, like consistent technical aspects of the storytelling part of it, then wow me with some crazy visual stuff.
Yeah, and they didn't really do either.
Right. Yeah. So it's not mind blowing, but it's fun.
Yeah, and I think I would recommend this movie, and
yeah, I would too.
Yeah. It's worth seeing, and I would say it's probably worth seeing in the theaters, especially if you get a theater as cold as the one we're in.
Right.
Like I'm wearing shorts and a t-shirt, and it's the middle of summer, and I'm like freezing in there.
Which kind of helped in a way.
It did. I mean, I felt like I was on one of those lunar landers, like freezing my ass off. But watching it on a small screen, I don't think it's gonna have the same effect, especially when there's tiny little things that move in there. So I would say either go see it in the theater or don't bother.
Yeah, and if you're the type of person that is, gonna do one or the other, then yeah, you're probably gonna go see it in the theater.
Yeah.
Like, and I told David, I was gonna see this while it was in the theater, regardless of, actually, I'm the type of person that would probably see it anyway, just because I have a lot of time on my hands. But yeah, it was good to see in the theater, and it was worth my money and my time.
Yeah.
So.
And then one final thing before we leave, I just want to promote Ben's YouTube channel. It's BD.
It's BD.
Hey, so what's your YouTube channel's name?
It's BDB Rock 26.
I'll put a link in the underbar. And what can you see there?
A lot of experimental video work.